Through the ages, is the grandest thing for a mortal tongue. It's the grandest thing that the world ever sung. Our God is able to deliver thee. He is able to deliver thee. He is able to deliver thee. Though my sin oppressed, go to Him for rest. Our God is able to deliver thee. It's the grandest thing in the earth or rain. It's the grandest thing for a mortal strength. It's the grandest thing that the world again. Our God is able to deliver thee. He is able to deliver thee. He is able to deliver thee. Though my sin oppressed, go to Him for rest. Our God is able to deliver thee. It's the grandest thing, let the tidings roll to the guilty heart, to the sinful soul. Look to God in faith, He will make thee whole. Our God is able to deliver thee. He is able to deliver thee. He is able to deliver thee. Though thy sin oppressed, go to Him for rest. Our God is able to deliver thee. Well, the way to keep people away on a Sunday night is just tell them you're going to have a long sermon and they'll stay away. But anyway, we're going to start so we can get done with this sermon. There are a lot of things that we'll cover, but hopefully designed it in such a way that we'll go through these relatively fast. We are studying the book of Galatians. This is the 10th lesson on the book of Galatians, and we're about nearly done with chapter 5, and of course there's only 6 chapters in the book of Galatians, and I don't know yet how I'll divide that up. We'll spend a couple of weeks at least probably on the fruit of the Spirit and help round out the book of Galatians. This is the idea of the flesh versus the Spirit, and the works of the flesh versus the fruit of the Spirit. As we've been reading and studying the book of Galatians, the main problem that they have is that they're carnal in their thinking. They're carnal in the things that they do. And if you think carnally, you're going to live carnally. And so that's where the works of the flesh come in. And so again, we focus our attention tonight on Galatians 5:19 through 21 as we consider the works of the flesh which are manifest or evident. We got through hatred in our study. It's been at least 3 weeks in that study. We had singing one time, and then we had Randy preach last week. And so, again, it's been a while, but if you want to go back, you can get online and look on Facebook or YouTube or our church website. All the sermons are on our church website. And you can go back and review the lesson if you like, or if you weren't here, you can review that first lesson on the fruit or the works of the flesh. We begin tonight with the word contentions. Contentions, again, using the New King James Version of the Bible. The word contentions is an interesting word. It carries with it the idea of strife, dissension, or conflict. And it's what you don't need in the Lord's church. It's what you don't need to spread in any place whatsoever. If you want to derail progress, you just throw in some contention. If you want to hold things back, You just throw in some contention. And the devil really wants to have the Lord's people have strife. He really wants the Lord's people to have conflict, because he knows that if we're fighting with one another, we're not going forward. We're either going to go backward or we're going to stand still, and both of those are a losing proposition. The word translated contentions in this particular verse appears 9 times in 9 verses of the New Testament. Well, let's think about the formula we've been using, and that is that we give the definition of the word and we share a few verses where the word appears. Tonight we want to begin by looking at Romans 13:13. As we read, let us walk properly as in the day. That's a very important statement there, because we're not children of the night. And Paul will use this idea of walking in the day or walking in the light or walking in general as a way to conduct our lives. And so the word walking here is really talking about an ongoing process that we're going through in life. And he says, walking as the day, not in revelry and in drunkenness, not in lewdness and lust, and not in strife or envy. Emphasize the word strife. You go to the church of Corinth, and Paul would write to them in 1 Corinthians 3 and verse 3. And he said, notice the language, for you are still carnal. What's the word carnal mean? Fleshly. You're still acting and living according to the flesh. And then he says, for where there are envy, strife, and divisions among you, are you not carnal and behaving like men? You see, if we know the cross of Jesus Christ, and if we're people of the cross, and if we're people that follow Jesus' example, and as we studied this morning, if we're humble, if we empty ourselves at the cross of Jesus Christ, then we're not going to have the strife that comes about when we want our own way, we want our own things, and we're not going to have contentions among us. And so, again, the work of the flesh, contentions. Next in the list, you have jealousies. Jealousies. And really, if you look in the New Testament, this word appears both in a favorable and an unfavorable sense, as it's used here in this verse. Here it means envy to sometimes the point of fury. I want you to keep that in mind. We'll use a couple of verses in it, but we see that, you had contentions, and then right on the tail of that, you had jealousies. That can be envy. And really, if you think about it, a lot of times the strife that is caused because there is ill feelings toward one another. Someone has a position that we want. Someone has something that we want, and we're jealous that they have that. We're envious that they have that. And we need to realize that it's something that God's people should not have in life. Again, the word translated in this particular text as jealousies appears 17 times in 17 verses in the New King James Version in the New Testament. Well, how's the word used? How does the word appear? Well, we again go to the book of Acts, in Acts the 13th chapter and verse 45. And it said the Jews were again getting after Paul. They were again wanting to attack Paul. And yet we find that part of this was caused because of this very thing of jealousy. But when the Jews saw the multitudes, all these people that were going to Paul and Barnabas at this time, and all these people were coming up and listening to Paul and everything, and hearing what Paul said, they got jealous. They were full of envy and contradicting and blaspheming. They opposed the things spoken of Paul. I think you can go back to the life of Christ and pick out the fact that even their treatment of Jesus might have been out of envy, because people were listening to Jesus more than they were listening to the scribes and the Pharisees and the leaders of the Sanhedrin court. So the Jews, it was a crowd thing. My crowd is bigger than your crowd. And they were envious or jealous. In 2 Corinthians 11 and verse 2, this is a positive use of our word that's translated jealousy. Paul said, "For I am jealous," positive sense, "for you with a godly jealousy." Positive. "For I betrothed you to one husband, that I may present you as a chaste virgin to Christ." Well, what's he talking about? He's talking about the church, the bride of Christ. And he said, "I'm jealous with you, with a godly jealous." Because why? You're engaged. Don't be messing around with other fellows, is what he's saying here. And then in 2 Corinthians 11 or 12 and verse 20, he said, "For I fear lest when I come I shall not find you as I wish." He knew there were problems there. And he said that I shall be found by you as you do not wish. Paul is kind of telling them, you better straighten up, because when I come again, you don't know what I'm going to say. And then he said, lest there be contentions that we've already discussed, jealousies, listed among other things, that outbursts of wrath, selfish ambitions, backbitings, whisperings, conceits, and tumults. I won't say a lot about the other things because we'll consider them as well. The next word that we're going to look at, in fact, is used in this verse here. Outburst of wrath. That's another work of the flesh that we don't need to have in our life. We all know what an outburst of wrath is. It's more than just an outburst of anger. Again, we need to distinguish between anger and wrath. We all get mad. And, it's just what we do sometimes. Somebody might cut us off in traffic. Somebody might say something bad about us. Somebody might not do something we like. And, we're ready to get mad. We're ready to get angry. But where does that become a problem at? Number one, it becomes a problem when we don't settle it. Remember when he said, do not let the sun go down on your wrath or your anger? Settle it. Take care of it. Well, wrath comes in when we let that fester. When we let that grow. We let it really spoil us. And it carries with it the idea of anger, wrath, rage, road rage. And it's both human and divine. God is a God of wrath, but He's also a God of love. And He's also human. And so again, we look at this word. It appears 18 times in 18 verses. We'll share a couple with you, or 3. Luke 4 and verse 28. So all those in the synagogue, when they heard these things, they were filled with wrath. We just studied that a couple of weeks ago when we studied in Luke. And Jesus was talking, about being the Son of God. He was condemning them for their teaching. He was condemning them for the things they were doing. He was condemning them for getting upset that He healed on the Sabbath, that He forgave sins and such like. And so what they did, everyone in the synagogue, they were filled with wrath. They sought and would seek to kill Him on a number of occasions. See, it goes beyond anger. We need to be careful to take care of our anger. Anger against our wives, anger against our children, anger against our employers, anger against people that we come in contact with that we feel like that mistreat us, because sometimes that anger turns into wrath, and when it turns into wrath, sometimes it has deadly consequences, doesn't it? People want to get even. And so we need to realize this. In Acts 19 chapter, beginning verse 28, when Paul was talking about the idea that, Diana's not your real God. She's just an idol. You need to repent from idols. And in Acts 19, verse 28, it says, now when they heard this, they were, there's our word, thymos, full of wrath. And they cried out, saying, great is Diana of the Ephesians. You know where you had Demetrius the coppersmith there, you had others that were there, and Paul was really robbing them of their business. And they were angry, and they cried out full of wrath. And then in Colossians, the 3rd chapter, in verse 8, Paul says, but now you yourselves are to put off all these things. Notice the similarity of the words that we're talking about. Because there are, again, works of the flesh. And he said to put off anger, and there's our word, wrath, malice, blasphemy. Well, filthy language out of your mouth. We need to not speak the things that we shouldn't. And then we have this idea in the next place of selfish ambition. It's not wrong to be ambitious. Sometimes if you don't have ambition, you don't go very far in life. You see a person that just always wants to have the status quo, always remain the same. Their life sometimes is this the same, never changes. Scenery never changes. And we tell our young people, and we tell our children, have some ambition. I mean, go for what you want to go for. Do what you want to do. But there is a sense that when we start wanting what we want and we turn ourselves inward, that begins to be a wrong thing. Selfish ambition. It implies rivalry. Rivalry is a good thing because, we have Southside here and we've got Batesville up across the river and we have the football game played, and when we play basketball against them, everything, it's a rivalry. And there's nothing wrong with a good kind of rivalry like that. And I think Arkansas Razorbacks are going to play ASU at War Memorial Stadium in football, so we got a little interstate rivalry. Or we play somebody like Texas or something like that, or Texas plays Oklahoma. It's just a part of things. But when that becomes wrong, when that becomes divisive, when that becomes an idea of selfishness, we'll have problems with that. It's a work of the flesh. This word appears 7 times in 7 different verses in the New King James Version of the Bible. Well, let's look at a couple of those times. Well, first of all, in Romans 2 and verse 8. But to those who are, here's your word, self-seeking. Self-seeking. And do not obey the truth, but obey unrighteousness, indignation, and wrath. So here's our word. Selfish ambition, or the word selfish ambition. That is a work of the flesh. It is also translated self-seeking, putting ourselves first. It is against how Christ was. Remember we talked this morning in Philippians 2 as we were talking about being humble, that Jesus Christ, he was equal with God. What would have happened if Jesus had gotten there and they were deciding that he was going to die on the cross for our sins even before God created the world? What would have happened if Jesus said, I just don't want to go through with it? What would have happened if Jesus was on earth and he said, this idea of setting the kingdom is good. I'm going to set up the kind of kingdom I'm on. And the cross never happened. We'd be lost. We probably wouldn't even be here tonight in this building, worshiping Jesus, worshiping God. Self-seeking. wanting our word. Philippians 1 and verse 16, Paul is talking about reasons people preach. There are those that preach for the wrong reason. There might have been a time in my life to where I might have stayed in preaching because, well, I didn't know nothing else to make a living at. It's kind of like anybody else in some jobs, you know. I always have loved to preach. I do love to preach. I preach because I love to do it. And I found out I can make a living at different times in this life. I worked at Truth for Today, and yeah, I raised money. I made a living at that. I've published, made sure of publishing a lot of books and different things, and oversaw 6 or 7 or 8 different languages, and I knew I could make a living at that. And this idea that, you know, we need to realize that in preaching, you don't need to preach for the wrong reasons. You need to preach because you love to preach the truth. But how about if you do it for the wrong reasons? Paul said the former preach Christ from selfish ambition. They're preaching to see, maybe have that status. You know, preachers, they get to stand in front of everybody. They usually get to stand elevated in front of everybody. They get their name on the sign outside. I don't know, it's about a year or so before I got my name on the sign. Never did really think about it. Had some people that lived up in Salem came by, and they said, "You are preaching here." Said, "Your name hadn't been is not on the sign." So I talked to the elders, and I went and got it painted and got my name on the sign. Selfish ambition. And they said, Paul said they did it to add affliction to his chains. Well, there we see that idea of selfish ambition. And then dissensions. Dissensions. Again, we talked about this idea of sowing discord. And we talked about this idea of contentions. And these are interposed, but they're different words. Here's the word dissension. Carries with it the idea of discord and division. You take a baseball team, and they're trying to win. Against the Cardinals, are the Cardinals doing pretty good? Depends, okay. Ask Patty, our resident expert. And but you know, either you got the Cardinals. I know last year or year before last, seemed like they had a lot of contention, you know, about whether the manager was any good, whether the catcher was any good, because that was after right after Yachty retired and all of that, and then you got contention, and you know they didn't do real good. And why? Because there was discord there. And it only takes one person to cause discord. But usually you've got a course of people that cause discord. But one person's enough. You can take a management team. You can take a team at work. You can take teachers at school. You can take students at school. If you got a few that want to cause disruption and discord, it's a bad thing. It is a work of the flesh. Are you getting this? It's not thinking the way that God wants Christians to think. It's used 3 times in 3 verses of the New Testament. I'll share 2 of them with you. In Romans the 16th chapter and verse 17, Paul said, "Now I urge you, brethren, note those who cause," here's that word, "divisions and offenses, contrary to the doctrine which you've learned, and avoid them." What do you do if a person comes in and starts teaching things that are not right? What if they stood up and said, "You know, I want to tell you about this thing about instrumental music. It's really just an opinion. I don't think a person could get away with preaching that here. But some places they can. What should you do to a person like that? You should say in the right way, in a loving way, no, that's not right. You're not preaching that here. I wonder if we had someone that said, well, I just believe that there's Christians in every congregation. And speaking congregationally in a sense, or in every church, is referring to denominations. What are we going to do? If someone divides, causes dissension, division, they need to be dealt with. 1 Corinthians 3 and verse 3, we read this verse, I believe, early, but he said, for you are still carnal, you're still fleshly. And he lists those things for envy, strife, and here's our word, divisions among you. Are you not carnal and behaving like men? You're not walking according to the Spirit, but of the flesh. Well, we move on. Then you had this interesting word, heresies. You ever heard anybody being called a heretic? They called Martin Luther a heretic because of the fact that he didn't believe in the sale of indulgences, but that the Roman Catholic Church did. He was labeled a heretic. He didn't believe in several other things, and he was labeled as a heretic, a false teacher among the Roman Catholic Church. And so we have these ideas of false teaching, of factions, of divisions. A lot of these words are not necessarily interchangeable, but they're similar in meaning. The word heresies appeared 9 times in 9 verses in the New Testament. Let's look at 2 of them. In Acts the 5th chapter, in verse 17, it says, then the high priest rose up, and all those who were with him, which is with him, and then in parentheses, which is the sect of the Sadducees, and they were filled with indignation. A lot of people say, the Lord's church, or the Church of Christ, is a sect. Well, we're not. A lot of times we'll have sects, or S-E-C-T, not S-E-X, sometimes in churches that cause divisions. Heresies, a sect. Go on to 1 Corinthians 11 verse 19. For those must also be factions among you. Again, the word heresy is also translated factions in this case. That those who are approved may be recognized among you. And again, he said there should be factions among you, or differences among you, division. And this is in the context of the spiritual gifts. And then as we go on, we go to our other word that we've read in a couple of verses already. And that's the word envy. That's the word envy. Similar to the other words that we've talked about, but it's the word jealousy, ill will. Again, it's looking at something somebody has and not being happy that they have it. He got the job promotion. I don't like him anymore. He gets the praise and the glory. I don't like him anymore. Being envy, having jealousy, and more than that, we wish them ill will. Simply because they may have what we think we deserve and don't want. Again, it was against the teaching of Paul when he said, don't look upon your own things, but look upon the things of others. when it talks about rejoicing with those that rejoice. Be happy for them. Be happy that a person got that promotion instead of us. They may have needed it more than we did. Be happy. Don't have ill will toward them. Again, 9 times in 9 verses that we read the idea of envy. Matthew 27, verse 18, talking about Pilate. Talking about why the Jews did to Jesus what they did. It says, for he, Pilate, knew that they handed him over because of envy. See what envy does? See what this ill will does? It causes us to do things like turn over the sinless Son of God to be crucified. It's a work of the flesh. It's carnal. Titus 3 and verse 3. For we ourselves also were foolish, disobedient, deceived, serving various lusts and pleasures, living in malice, and here it is, envy, hateful, and hating one another. Those is a combination there, isn't it? Being hateful and hating one another. Well, that all comes out of envy. That all comes out of ill will toward one another. And we treat one another in a way that is wrong. Well, we have just a few more, and then we're done. I told you I'd try to get through, and I'll try to keep my word. The next one we come is the idea of murders. And some of the New Translation, murders is not listed, like in the New American Standard, the English Standard Version, and others, but it is in the manuscripts of the King James and also the manuscripts of the New King James. But murderers. And this means killing or slaughter. It appears 10 times in 10 verses. We need to realize that under the Old Testament, it talks about a difference in killing somebody and murdering somebody. There was a distinction if a person killed somebody in self-defense. That's why you had the cities of refuge they could flee to. And that's killing in war and battle. It kind of throws under the different things. Remember, Jesus said, you've heard, thou shalt not murder, but I said, if you hate your brother without a cause, you are guilty of murder in your heart. And so we have this idea of murderers, of killing or slaughter. And again, 3 times in 3 verses, I'll share 2 of them with you. 10 times in 10 verses. I'll share 2 of them with you. Matthew 15, verse 19. For out of the heart. Now it's not talking about this right here. It's talking about right up here. Cardia, that's the word. For out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murderers, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, and blasphemy. Notice the company some of these things keep. Not good company. Okay? And in Acts 9:1, then Saul of Tarsus, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest. Murder. And so, we see that as well. We come down to the last 2 that is interesting. And I say the last 2, we'll talk a little bit about that before we close. The last 2. The word drunkenness. Drunkenness. I was studying this, and I realized that the meaning given to this word drunkenness refers to the state of being intoxicated or inebriated. And we sometimes wonder, well, how many drinks does a person have to take to be drunken? Well, Guy in Woods used to say, that if you take 1 drink, you're somewhere on the scale of being enumerated that much. Okay? And we know it's, people debate about social drinking and things of this nature. I think you ought to leave this stuff alone. We talked about that some in our last lesson. And we talked about a similar word, about what drunkenness does. Drunkenness will cause you to do things that you normally wouldn't do. Because you lose your inhibitions, you lose your faculties to decide what's right and what's wrong sometimes. People will get drunk in the state of intoxicating. By the way, you can throw in abusing drugs, ecstasy, and things of this nature. They make you lose your inhibitions. And we live in a party society. It's in schools, it's in colleges, it's in the workplace. It's Friday. And it's Saturday. We got, time to go out and party. It's Saturday night. Let's party. And we fill our lakes up, and we fill ballparks up and everything with people that are drunken people. It's a work of the flesh. It's used 3 times in 3 verses. Let's look at Luke 21, verse 34. But take heed to yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down with carousing, we'll talk about that in a moment, and drunkenness, and the cares of this life, and that day come on you unexpectedly. More than likely, that might have been the destruction of Jerusalem. Be careful. Don't be weighed down with carousing or drunkenness or the cares of this life. Well, Romans 13:13. Let us walk properly as in the day, not in revelry and drunkenness, not in lewdness and lust, not in strife and envy. Several of our words that we've talked about tonight. I like the idea of walk as in the day. That doesn't mean what it used to mean. You used to hear the expression, well, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, usually by people that are drinking in the middle of the day. And I don't know if you used to see it as much, but there are those that doesn't matter what kind of time of day it is, they're so addicted to alcohol they drink any time of the day. Drunkenness. Drunkenness to any degree is being enumerated. It's being intoxicated. Yeah, you have to be past a certain limit to get charged with drunk driving or to be charged with under the influence, whether it's marijuana or something of this nature. Well, let's go to the last word, and that's revelries. Notice drunkenness comes first, and then revelries. This word carries with it the idea of orgies. Remember, we started off talking about adulteries, fornication, orgies, drunken parties, where sex runs wild. Revelry. It's not wrong to be happy. It's not wrong to have a good time. It's not wrong to be, loud, boisterous, if you get together at some church gatherings, and get a bunch of Christians together, they're going to have fun. They're going to do it without alcohol, but they're going to have fun. They're going to laugh, they're going to joke, and they're going to hoop, and they're going to hop. There's nothing wrong with that. But you're talking about a difference here because, again, it comes after drunkenness, and again, it carries with the idea you're starting to do things that are not right. Carousing. 3 times in 3 verses, and we'll look at every one of them. We'll look at 2 of them. The New American Standard says in Romans 13:13, and we've used this verse, but I want to use it again. Let us behave properly as in the day. And there's our word, not in carousing and drunkenness. Two go hand in hand. Not in sexual promiscuity and sensuality. Not in strife and jealousy. The ESV says in Romans 13:13, let us walk properly as in the daytime. Not in, there's our word, orgies and drunkenness. Two are together. Not in sexual immorality, sensuality, not in quarreling and jealousy. And then in 1 Peter 4 and verse 3, for we have spent enough of our past lifetime and doing the will of the Gentiles. Paul said you've spent enough of your time. And here's how you walked. When you walked in lewdness, in lust, in drunkenness, and there's our word, revelries, drinking parties, and abominable idolatries. Our young people and the older people, they get themselves into trouble by going out to bars, drinking with their friends, a lot of times losing all inhibitions, and they will do things that they wouldn't normally do. And folks, that's dangerous. And lives have been changed and lives have been ruined. Well, what do we do with the rest of the list? You say, what list? Paul concludes with, and such like. In other words, whatever goes against God and goes against Christ, do not do. And here's Paul's warning. And it's simple, straightforward, and to the point. Couldn't be clearer as we discussed all these things. Paul said, of which I tell you beforehand, just as I told you in the times past. And those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. Period. Folks, are you walking according to the flesh or according to the Spirit? If you need to respond tonight, the lesson is yours. Won't you come as we stand and sing?
Living below in this simple world, I may comprehend afford, striving alone to face temptation's sword. Where could I go but to the Lord? Where could I go? Oh, where could I go? Seeking a refuge for my soul. Needing a friend to save me in the end. Where could I go but to the Lord? Neighbors are kind, I love them every one. We get along in sweet accord. But when my soul needs manna from above, where could I go but to the Lord? Where could I go? Oh, where could I go? Seeking a refuge for my soul, needing a friend to save